My fiancé secretly used our wedding fund to take his ex on vacation. I found out my fiancé spent our wedding fund on a luxury vacation. What made it worse? He took his ex. And somehow that wasn't even the biggest betrayal. For context, my fiancé, Ryan, and I had been together for 4 years. For most of that time, I genuinely believed we had the kind of relationship people envied. No constant fighting, no dramatic breakups, no major trust issues. We had our problems, sure. But nothing that made me question marrying him, at least not until 6 months before the wedding. We'd spent nearly 2 years saving for our big day. Every extra dollar went into a dedicated wedding account. Birthday money, tax refunds, bonuses, everything. The account eventually reached almost 35,000. Neither dollars of us came from wealthy families, so that money represented a lot of sacrifices, skipped vacations, old cars, extra shifts. Countless nights eating cheap takeout instead of going out. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the venue coordinator called me. I assumed she was discussing decorations. Instead, she sounded confused. She asked if we were still getting married. I laughed and said yes. Then she informed me our final deposit had never arrived. My stomach immediately dropped. Because Ryan told me he had already sent it, I logged into the account while still on the phone. The balance was barely 8,000. I stared at the screen, refreshed it. Logged out, logged back in. Still 8,000 over dollars, $27,000 was gone. Gone. The venue coordinator was still talking, but I barely heard her. My ears were ringing. The moment I hung up, I called Ryan straight to voicemail. Again voicemail, again voicemail. 3 hours later, he finally answered. His voice sounded oddly relaxed. I immediately asked where the money was. Silence. Then he laughed nervously. A terrible sign. Ryan claimed he'd made a temporary investment. A temporary investment. With wedding money, without discussing it. Apparently, according to him, he was trying to grow our savings before the wedding, because nothing says responsible adulthood like gambling your fiancé's money in secret. I demanded proof. He promised he'd show me everything later. But later never came. Every explanation changed. Every story had holes. The numbers didn't make sense. The dates didn't match. And the more questions I asked, the more defensive he became. A week later, things got even stranger. Ryan suddenly announced he needed to travel for work. His company occasionally sent employees on trips, so it wasn't unusual, except for one thing. His company had recently laid off half the department. Business travel was practically frozen. I knew that because one of my friends worked there. Still, Ryan packed a suitcase and left. 3 days later, I received a message from someone I didn't know. The profile picture belonged to a woman. The message simply said, "Are you engaged to Ryan?" My heart nearly stopped. I replied yes. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then she sent a photograph. Ryan was sitting beside another woman at an oceanfront restaurant. Not a coworker, not a client. His ex-girlfriend, Madison. The same Madison he claimed he hadn't spoken to in years. The same Madison he called ancient history. Same Madison currently drinking champagne beside him. I felt physically sick. The stranger explained she worked at the resort where the photo was taken. Apparently, Ryan and Madison had checked in together, using the same reservation. The cost of the trip, almost 20,000 coincidentally dollars, very close to the amount missing from our account. At that point, I wanted to confront him immediately. But something didn't feel right. The numbers still didn't add up. If the trip cost $20,000, where was the rest of the money? Nearly $7,000 remained unaccounted for, so I stayed quiet. And I started digging. The stranger who contacted me turned out to be incredibly helpful. She'd recognized Ryan because she'd seen one of my engagement photos on social media months earlier. The more information she provided, the stranger the situation became. Because Madison didn't seem like Ryan's girlfriend. She seemed angry. Several employees overheard them arguing repeatedly. One argument apparently became so heated that Madison stormed out of the hotel lobby. That confused me. If Ryan spent our wedding money to reunite with his ex, why were they constantly fighting? The answer arrived 2 days later, and it completely changed the story. Ryan accidentally left his tablet connected to our shared cloud account. While reviewing synced files, I discovered dozens of documents, spreadsheets, contracts, emails, and one folder labeled Project Phoenix. Inside were records showing transfers from our wedding account, but the money wasn't going directly to vacations. The money was being funneled somewhere else first, a company, one I'd never heard of. The owner's name nearly made me fall out of my chair. Madison, his ex. Suddenly, the vacation looked less like a romantic getaway and more like a business deal. But why hide it? Why lie? Why steal from our wedding fund? Then I opened the final document. A legal agreement, dated 11 months earlier. Ryan's signature was on it. Madison's signature was on it. And buried in paragraph 7 was a sentence that changed everything. Ryan wasn't just financially connected to his ex. He owed her money. A lot of money. Far more than our wedding fund contained. And according to the contract, if he failed to pay by the end of the month, Madison could expose a secret that would destroy his career, cancel our wedding, and potentially land him in court. At that moment, I realized the vacation wasn't a reunion. It was a negotiation. And whatever secret Ryan was hiding had been buried for years. The worst part, I still had absolutely no idea what that secret was. But I was about to find out. And when I did, I wished I hadn't. I spent the entire night staring at that contract. At first, I thought it had to be fake, some misunderstanding, some bizarre explanation that would somehow make everything reasonable. But the more documents I opened, the worse things became. The debt was real. The transfers were real. The company was real. And Ryan had been hiding all of it for almost a year. The next morning, I called my best friend, Chloe. I showed her everything, the bank statements, the company records, the contract. When she finished reading, she looked at me and said something that hadn't crossed my mind. What if Madison isn't blackmailing him? What if they're working together? Honestly, that possibility scared me even more. Because if Madison was blackmailing him, Ryan was stupid. If they were working together, Ryan was calculating. And there was a huge difference between the two. Over the next few days, I continued investigating. Ryan was still on his business trip. Still sending me fake updates. Still pretending everything was normal. Meanwhile, I discovered something strange about Project Phoenix. The company technically existed, but it barely did any business. No real clients, no real products, no social media presence. Nothing, yet thousands of dollars flowed through its accounts. The entire thing felt suspicious. Then another surprise landed in my lap, an email, not from Ryan, not from Madison, from Ryan's former business partner. Apparently, he found my contact information online. His message was short. "We need to talk before you marry him." Exactly the kind of email a bride wants to receive. We met the following afternoon. I expected gossip. Maybe a bitter former friend. Instead, the man arrived carrying a thick folder. The moment he sat down, he slid it across the table. "Never told you about the failed startup, did he?" Failed startup. I had never heard those words before. According to him, 3 years ago, Ryan and Madison launched a business together. The company collapsed. Investors lost money. Relationships exploded. Everyone walked away angry, or so I thought. Because apparently Ryan and Madison never fully separated their finances. Some debts remained unresolved. Some promises remained unfinished. And one investor in particular wanted repayment. Fast. Suddenly things made a little more sense. But not enough. If this was simply debt repayment, why all the secrecy? Why the vacation? Why the lies? Then the former partner revealed the twist I never saw coming. The investor wasn't the problem. Ryan was. Apparently Ryan had hidden money from everyone, including Madison, including the investors, including his own business partners. Years ago, before the company collapsed, a large amount of money disappeared. Nobody could prove what happened, but everyone suspected Ryan. My stomach dropped. Because if that accusation was true, then the debt wasn't really debt, it was repayment. And if Madison had proof, the blackmail suddenly became very believable. That night Ryan finally returned home. I acted normal, painfully normal. I even asked about his trip. The lies flowed effortlessly. He described fake meetings, fake clients, fake hotel problems. The confidence was honestly impressive. If I didn't already know the truth, I probably would have believed him. Then he casually kissed my forehead and said, "I can't wait to marry you." Almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. At that point, I felt like I was sharing a house with a complete stranger. Still, I kept quiet, because I needed one final piece of information. The secret. The one Madison supposedly held over him. The secret worth destroying our wedding for. 3 days later, I got my answer. And it came from Madison herself. She called me, directly. At first, I thought it was a prank, then I heard her voice. She sounded exhausted, not angry, not smug, exhausted. "I think we need to talk." Every alarm bell in my head went off, but curiosity won. We agreed to meet. The meeting lasted almost 4 hours. And by the end of it, everything I believed had changed. Madison didn't hate me. In fact, she seemed genuinely sorry. She told me Ryan had spent years manipulating people, friends, business partners, family members, even her. Then she dropped the biggest bombshell yet. The vacation wasn't Ryan's idea. It was hers. I just stared at her. That made absolutely no sense. Why would she take a vacation with her ex, Madison explained. Because she wanted answers too. The entire trip was actually supposed to be a private negotiation. One last attempt to recover money she believed Ryan still owed. The resort wasn't romantic. It was neutral territory. And according to her, they spent most of the trip arguing. Suddenly, those reports from hotel employees made sense. But then Madison said something that completely blindsided me. There's one thing Ryan hasn't told either of us. What? She took a deep breath, then pushed a document across the table. I looked down and immediately recognized the name. It wasn't Madison's. It wasn't Ryan's. It belonged to another woman, a woman neither of us knew, or at least that's what I thought, until I saw her photograph. Because I had seen her before, several times, at family events and wedding photos, even at our engagement party. The mystery woman wasn't a stranger. She was one of Ryan's closest friends. And according to the paperwork in front of me, she wasn't just his friend. She owned 50% of Project Phoenix, which meant Ryan hadn't been hiding one secret partner. He'd been hiding two. And suddenly the missing wedding money looked like the smallest problem in the entire story. That's when I realized this situation was far bigger than an ex-girlfriend, a vacation, or a stolen wedding fund. I was standing in the middle of something much messier. And for the first time, even Madison looked scared. I left that meeting with Madison more confused than ever. Originally, I thought I was dealing with a cheating fiancé. Then I thought I was dealing with a financial betrayal. Now it felt like I had accidentally walked into a mystery involving hidden business partners, secret money, and years of lies. The worst part, I still didn't know who was telling the truth. Ryan had lied. That was obvious. But Madison had reasons to protect herself too. For all I knew, both of them could be manipulating me. So I decided to trust nobody, including my own assumptions. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ownership documents Madison gave me. The mysterious partner's name appeared everywhere: contracts, bank records, company filings, yet somehow Ryan had never mentioned her, not once. Which was strange because the woman wasn't some random acquaintance. She was someone who attended birthdays, holiday parties, even our engagement celebration. Ryan introduced her as an old friend named Olivia, just a friend, nothing more. At least that's what he claimed. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I contacted Olivia directly. I expected her to ignore me. Instead, she replied within 10 minutes. Her response was short. "There's a lot you don't know." Exactly reassuring. We agreed to meet. And the moment she sat down across from me, I realized she looked nervous, really nervous. Not the kind of nervousness someone has when they're caught. The kind people have when they're carrying information they've wanted to share for a long time. I got straight to the point. "Why do you own half of Project Phoenix?" Olivia closed her eyes. Then she sighed and said 5 words that completely changed everything. "I don't own any of it." I blinked. "What?" She pushed a folder toward me. Inside were legal documents proving she had tried to remove her name from the company years ago. But somehow the paperwork was never completed. According to her, Ryan kept delaying it, making excuses, creating complications, promising he'd handle it later. Later never came, which meant her name remained attached to everything, every transaction, every debt, every questionable decision. The more she explained, the worse Ryan looked. But then she revealed something unexpected. She wasn't afraid of Madison. She wasn't afraid of investors. She wasn't even afraid of lawsuits. She was afraid of Ryan, not because he was dangerous, because he was desperate. And desperate people made unpredictable choices. Then she showed me a recent message he had sent her. My heart nearly stopped. The message read, "If she finds out everything before the wedding, we're both finished." We're both finished, not IWE, meaning Olivia knew something important, something Ryan desperately wanted hidden. I asked her directly, "What am I missing?" She looked at me for several seconds, as if debating whether to speak. Then she finally answered, "Ryan isn't trying to save the wedding." "What?" "He's trying to save himself." That sentence stayed with me, because suddenly every lie started looking different. The missing money, the fake business trip, the vacation, the secret contracts. Maybe none of it was about romance. Maybe Ryan had a completely different goal, a goal I hadn't considered. Then Olivia handed me one final document, and the moment I read it, my stomach dropped. It was a loan application, submitted 2 months earlier, the borrower Ryan. The requested amount, $250,000. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the collateral listed on the application, our future house, a property we didn't even own yet. Ryan had apparently used our engagement plans, our future finances, and projected wedding assets to convince lenders he was financially stable. He was building an entire financial house of cards, one that depended on me marrying him. Suddenly, everything clicked. The wedding wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was part of his escape plan. Without the marriage, lenders would ask questions. Without the marriage, financial documents would collapse. Without the marriage, his carefully constructed image could unravel. For the first time, I began wondering if Ryan wanted a wife at all, or if he simply needed one. The next few days were tense. I pretended nothing was wrong. Ryan pretended everything was perfect. Meanwhile, I quietly gathered evidence, bank records, messages, contracts, screenshots. By the end of the week, I had enough information to fill an entire storage box. Then fate handed me one final surprise. A surprise that neither Madison nor Olivia knew about. While reviewing older bank transfers, I discovered a payment made nearly 18 months earlier. A payment nobody had mentioned. The amount wasn't huge, but the recipient caught my attention. Because it wasn't a business, it wasn't an investor, and it wasn't Madison. It was a private account belonging to someone from Ryan's family, specifically his younger brother. At first, I assumed it was a loan, maybe financial help, maybe a family emergency. Then I noticed there were dozens of transfers, not one, dozens, spread across years. The total exceeded $60,000. I immediately called Ryan's brother. And after a long silence, he confessed something shocking. He had no idea the money came from Ryan. For years, someone had been sending anonymous payments to help cover debts and expenses. He never knew who the sender was, not until I showed him the records. That discovery created a new question. If Ryan was secretly helping his brother, why hide it? Why bury it beneath fake companies and complicated transactions? The answer arrived later that evening. And it was the moment everything finally exploded. Because Ryan came home early. He walked into the living room, saw the folders, saw the documents, saw the evidence, and instantly knew. The look on his face told me everything. The lies were over, the secrets were exposed. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ryan stopped pretending. He sat down, looked directly at me, and said, "Before you decide whether to leave, there's something you've never been told about how all of this started." Then he opened a drawer, pulled out an old photograph, and placed it on the table. I looked down. My blood ran cold. Because standing beside Ryan in that photo wasn't Madison. It wasn't Olivia. It wasn't even his brother. It was someone else entirely. Someone connected to me. Someone I trusted. Someone who should have had absolutely nothing to do with this story. And suddenly I realized the betrayal was much closer to home than I ever imagined. For several seconds, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. I just stared at the photograph, then stared at Ryan, then back at the photograph. Because the person standing beside him was my cousin, Sarah, not a distant relative, not someone I saw once every few years. Sarah and I grew up together. She attended family holidays. She was one of the first people I called when I got engaged. She was supposed to be one of my bridesmaids. Yet there she was in a photograph taken years before Ryan and I even met, smiling beside him. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusions. Ryan noticed. Before you assume anything, let me explain. For once, I let him talk, not because I trusted him, because I wanted answers, real answers. Ryan explained that years ago, before we met, Sarah briefly worked with him, Madison, and Olivia during the startup phase of their business. Apparently, she helped with marketing and networking, nothing unusual, at least initially. Then things became complicated. According to Ryan, Sarah introduced them to several investors. Some investments succeeded. Others didn't. When the company eventually collapsed, relationships were damaged and accusations started flying. That's where the missing money mystery began. At first, I wasn't convinced. After everything he'd done, why should I believe him? Then he handed me another folder. Unlike the others, this one looked old, very old. Inside were emails, contracts, messages, documents dating back years. I spent nearly an hour reading them, and slowly an uncomfortable truth emerged. For the first time since this nightmare started, Ryan wasn't entirely lying. That didn't make him innocent, far from it. But the story was bigger than I'd realized. Much bigger. Years earlier, when the startup began struggling, investors panicked. Everyone started blaming everyone else. Madison blamed Ryan. Ryan blamed investors. Investors blamed management. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to distance herself from the situation. At least publicly. Privately, however, things were different. Several emails suggested she knew far more than she admitted, enough to make me uncomfortable, enough to explain why Ryan kept certain secrets hidden. But before I could reach a conclusion, Ryan dropped another bombshell. Money wasn't stolen. I laughed, actually laughed, because after everything I discovered, that statement sounded ridiculous. Ryan shook his head. The wedding fund wasn't taken for the reasons you think. Then he showed me bank records I had never seen before. Transactions from accounts I didn't know existed, transfers moving between multiple sources, some connected to old business obligations, some connected to personal debts, some connected to family matters. And suddenly I understood why the financial trail looked so chaotic. Ryan hadn't stolen money for a vacation. He'd been moving money everywhere trying to stop several problems from colliding at once. A terrible decision. A dishonest decision. But not the simple story I'd imagined. Still, one question remained. Then why lie? That was the question that mattered, not the business, not the investors, not Madison, the lies. Ryan stared at the floor, then finally answered. Because every time I tried to fix one problem, another appeared. Explanation. But probably true, the problem wasn't that mistakes happened. The problem was that he kept choosing deception instead of honesty. And every lie created 3 new lies. Then came the final revelation. The one that tied everything together. The vacation. The debt. The ex, the business, the missing money, everything. According to Ryan, the resort meeting was supposed to be the last attempt to settle years of unfinished financial disputes. Madison wanted closure. Investors wanted repayment. Olivia wanted her name removed. Ryan wanted everyone to stop threatening lawsuits. The vacation itself was never romantic. It was basically a negotiation that happened at a resort because nobody trusted anyone enough to meet privately. Ironically, that explanation matched everything Madison had told me. For the first time, both of their stories lined up. And that terrified me, because it meant the situation was probably real. But even then, I wasn't ready to forgive him, not even close. Because regardless of his intentions, he still drained our wedding fund, he still lied for months, he still allowed me to plan a wedding while knowing the money was disappearing. Nothing could erase that. A week later, I made a decision. I canceled the wedding. Not forever, just indefinitely. And that announcement created absolute chaos. Family members demanded explanations. Friends started asking questions. Vendors wanted answers. Everyone suddenly became an investigator. Ryan didn't fight me, which honestly surprised me. After months of excuses, he finally accepted responsibility. He admitted the trust was broken. He admitted he caused the situation. He admitted that even if every explanation was true, none of it justified keeping me in the dark. For the first time, I saw genuine accountability. Not excuses, not deflection, accountability, and that mattered, not enough to fix everything, but enough to notice. Over the following months, more information surfaced. The business disputes slowly settled. Olivia was officially removed from the company. Madison reached a financial agreement. The investors stopped pursuing legal action. One by one, the fires Ryan created finally burned out. Meanwhile, I focused on something completely different, myself. Because after spending months untangling someone else's mess, I realized I hadn't thought about my own future. The wedding fund eventually recovered, not overnight, not easily. But piece by piece, Ryan repaid every dollar he had taken, every single one, without arguments, without conditions, without excuses. That didn't automatically rebuild trust. Trust doesn't work like that. But it was a start. The funny thing is, people always ask whether we got married. They expect a dramatic ending, a huge confrontation, a perfect resolution. Life isn't always that neat. The truth is much simpler. The wedding didn't happen that year, or the year after, because before planning a marriage, we had to figure out whether we could rebuild honesty. And honestly, that was far harder than planning any wedding. What I learned from the entire experience wasn't that secrets destroy relationships. Everyone already knows that. What destroys relationships is when someone decides protecting themselves is more important than telling the truth. Because by the time the truth finally comes out, the damage is usually much bigger than the original mistake. And if there's one thing I'll never forget, it's this. The missing money wasn't what nearly ended our relationship. The lies did. And those cost far more than any wedding fund ever could.